The story begins in the muddy, rutted fields of North Africa and the Eastern Front. In the early 1940s, the German military machine was widely perceived as the pinnacle of mechanization. However, this was a myth. Most of the German army still relied on millions of horses and a chaotic mess of over-engineered, specialized vehicles that broke down if the oil wasn't perfect. Then came the Jeep. When the first Willys MBs were captured by the Afrika Korps, the German soldiers didn't just see a car, they saw a mechanical impossibility. The Jeep was a classless vehicle. In the German army, if you were an officer, you rode in a staff car. If you were a soldier, you walked or rode a motorcycle. The Jeep broke every rule of German military hierarchy. It was small enough to hide in a ditch, yet powerful enough to tow an anti-tank gun. This act explores the technical obsession German engineers had with the Jeep. They tore captured units apart to find the secret, only to find there wasn't one. The secret was simplicity. While the German Beutewagen was rear-wheel drive and air-cooled, it lacked the raw go-anywhere torque of the Jeep's 4x4 system. By the midpoint of this act, we look at the psychological impact. German soldiers began to realize that the Americans weren't just bringing better guns, they were bringing a better way of moving. The Jeep allowed the average Joe to have the mobility of a general. To a German Lanzer stuck in the mud of Russia or the sand of Tunisia, the Jeep represented a level of industrial freedom they couldn't imagine. It was the first sign that the American arsenal of democracy wasn't just about quantity, it was about a superior philosophy of design. By 1943, the Jeep had become the most valuable war trophy a German soldier could find. In the brutal economy of the front lines, a captured Sherman tank was often seen as a burden, too thirsty for fuel and too difficult to repair. But a captured Jeep? That was a different story. It was immediately repainted with the Balkenkreuz, the German cross, and assigned to the highest-ranking officer in the area. This was the birth of the Beutewagen culture, the obsession with captured vehicles. To the German soldier, the Jeep was the ultimate status symbol, representing a level of mobility and industrial luxury that the Wehrmacht simply could not provide to its own men. The primary reason for this deep-seated envy was the catastrophic logistical nightmare of the German military industry. While the Americans were mass-producing the Willys MB and the Ford GPW to a single universal set of blueprints, the German military was drowning in over-engineered variety. At any given time, the German army was trying to maintain over 150 different types of light and medium vehicles. If a Mercedes-built staff car broke down in the middle of a Russian winter, you needed a specific part from a specific factory in Stuttgart. If that factory had been bombed by the RAF, your car became a very expensive pile of scrap metal. The Jeep, however, was a masterpiece of standardization. German mechanics were baffled to find that parts from a Jeep captured in the sands of North Africa would fit perfectly into a Jeep captured in the hedgerows of Normandy. This interchangeability was a concept the German industry, with its focus on artisanal, specialized engineering, simply couldn't grasp. This standardization led to a phenomenon we can call maintenance envy. A German mechanic spent his days trying to solve complex engineering puzzles on machines that were never designed to be repaired in the mud. When he opened the hood of a Jeep, he found a simple, rugged Go Devil engine. It was an engine designed for the average Joe, simple to understand and easy to fix with a basic set of tools. The Germans realized that the American philosophy wasn't to build the most perfect machine, but the most practical one. This act explores the famous secret Jeep versus Beutewagen trials conducted by captured German engineers. They found that while their own Beutewagen was lighter and used less fuel, it was only rear-wheel drive. In the deep, bone-chilling mud of the Eastern Front, the general mud that swallowed entire divisions, the Beutewagen would get stuck, where the Jeep's four-wheel drive system allowed it to simply crawl away.
The Jeep didn't just drive over the terrain, it conquered it. The Jeep's ability to survive the impossible conditions of the war became legendary among the Germans. As the temperature dropped to 40 below, German air-cooled engines struggled to turn over, and their complex cooling systems cracked under the pressure of the ice. The Jeep, with its heavy-duty radiator and low-compression engine, seemed to thrive in the cold. German officers began to hoard captured Jeeps, hiding them from their own superiors so they wouldn't be confiscated and sent to the general staff. There are documented accounts of German units running out of ammunition and food, yet they would expend their last drops of precious fuel just to keep a captured Jeep running. Even the Desert Fox himself, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, was so impressed by the Jeep's performance in the Sahara that he frequently used captured Allied vehicles for his own personal reconnaissance. He trusted American engineering more than his own specialized desert cars provided by his own high command. This wasn't just a tactical preference, it was a silent, devastating admission. The Germans realized that while they were focused on building superweapons like the Tiger tank, the Americans had built something much more dangerous, a reliable, universal tool that never quit. The billion-dollar prize wasn't a tank or a jet, it was a small 4x4 that proved the war would be won by the side that could keep moving when the world turned to mud.
The final act of the Jeep's story is the most ironic. For years, the world had been told the story of the mechanized blitzkrieg, the image of a German army moving entirely on wheels and tracks. But the reality was that 80% of the German army still relied on horses. As the Allies pushed toward the Rhine in 1944 and 1945, the contrast became impossible to ignore. The German army was retreating on horse-drawn wagons, while the Americans were chasing them in a vehicle that seemed to do everything. This was the versatility gap, and it was the final insult to German military pride. The Jeep was no longer just a transport vehicle, it had become a modular weapon system. The Germans watched in frustration as the Jeep was adapted for every possible role on the battlefield. They saw follow-me Jeeps directing massive bomber fleets on newly captured airfields. They saw amphibian Jeeps crossing rivers that were supposed to be natural barriers. They saw Jeeps equipped with massive radio arrays acting as modal command centers, allowing American lieutenants to call in airstrikes with a speed the Germans couldn't comprehend. But perhaps most terrifying to the German infantry was the recce Jeep, stripped of its windshield, loaded with extra fuel cans, and mounting a .50 caliber Browning machine gun. These fast-moving scouts could bypass German strongpoints, scout the rear, and vanish before a Tiger tank could even rotate its turret. The Jeep's greatest impact, however, was in its role as a force multiplier. Because it could tow a 37mm anti-tank gun or carry a literal ton of ammunition, a single Jeep could give a small squad of paratroopers the firepower of a much larger unit. The Germans admired this power-to-weight ratio. They saw the Jeep being dropped from transport planes or stuffed into gliders. They realized that the Jeep had removed the friction of war. It made the movement of supplies, the evacuation of the wounded, and the delivery of orders seamless. To the German soldier, who was often hungry, out of ammo, and stranded by his own broken-down trucks, the sight of a line of Jeeps bringing hot food and fresh ammunition to the American front lines was the ultimate sign that the war was lost. The video concludes with the Jeep's legacy in the ruins of the Third Reich. When the war ended, the Jeep didn't go home. Thousands of them remained in Germany, helping to clear the rubble and rebuild the infrastructure. The German people, who had spent years admiring the vehicle from the wrong end of a machine gun, now saw it as a symbol of reconstruction. It became the blueprint for the modern 4x4,
a vehicle that transcended its military roots to become a global icon. The German admiration for the Jeep was the highest form of flattery, a recognition that while they had built the most fearsome tanks and the most advanced jets, the Americans had built the one thing that truly mattered, the machine that kept the army moving. The Jeep wasn't just a car, it was the engine of victory.
Help us keep these brave stories alive by liking and sharing. It means a lot to have you in our squad. Subscribe to join us for the next mission. See you then.